niche to music will emerge. Yesterday I compared comics to taxidermy, in the sense that if you're a taxidermy, if you like stuffed animals, or if you make stuffed animals, you know all about them. Your family, you love them. But people who don't know about them have no fucking idea what you're talking about. That's how comics are. So recently there's been this comics broke me movement. You know, we live in a culture that weaponizes fragility. You know, I have friends who have security animals, but I try to keep my counsel and not lose my shit. But I find the weaponizing of fragility and the idea of identifying myself as the equivalent of a woodland fawn against a culture that will eat you alive is self-destructive and pointless. This comics broke me stuff has really boiled down to a series of, not necessarily generationally divided. I'm not really a supporter of this concept of generations. I think schmucks have been around since the dawn of man. That this idea that's come out there entitled to a career by wanting. I had a lot of want when I became a comic book artist, but I worked my fucking ass off to satisfy that want that became a need. And comics is not a place where you can depend on it for anything. There's no money in it. You know, there's a delusion of the 1990s with all those guys who left Marvel and formed Image and made shitloads of money. And then those books made money because they sold millions to people who thought they were making investments. Those books, there are warehouses of them crumbling into kindling right now. There are only approximately 250,000 people in the entire United States buying all the comic books we make. That's it. So when you see books selling for 1 million copies, there's still schmucks out there thinking they're an investment. Okay? And I'm a weird anomaly in that, because I would say that perhaps no more than 30,000, perhaps 35,000 people in that 250,000 have any idea, if they know my existence at all, they haven't done anything other than Star Wars. Now understand, I'm not being self-deprecating. I know how good I am. I have an enormous ego. Trust me. My self-regard is beyond guileless. It is deeply guileless. But accompanying that self-regard is also a self-awareness. And I know full well where I stand at a commercial token, and I haven't gotten one at all. Because my audience doesn't exist. It took me years to understand that I was writing and drawing today for an audience that I grossly overestimated. You got a question? Or are you just scratching your head?
No.
Loud!
Sir, health of comic book artists, the more I read about these artists, and the more I realize there's some
Mental health or physical health?
Physical health, really long lives. I mean, how lonely it was. Some guys just turned out of the board, and I watched the documentary on Dave Stevens and read about Gene Day and the theory that he was worked to death. What is your take on that? Is that a real thing, or is it just luck?
It sounds like whiny bullshit to me. I mean, I'm 72 years old. I'm 72 and a half. I'll be 73 in a month. I'm always a half until the day before. Okay, that's a whole. Look, I can hold on to one aspect of my adolescence just as you would hold on to so many of your own. I'm a bright guy. You know, I'm a pretty smart guy. But in the comic books, it's a really low bar, as most people are fucking idiots. I understood. I moved to California the day before I turned 35. The reason I moved to California, and the reason I'm now 38 years in Southern California, and I remain a New Yorker on permanent leave, because no one can mistake me for a Californian, for fuck's sake. But I lived in Southern California for that time, because I understood, intellectually and spiritually, that I had no prospects. That flag had come out in 1983, to some acclaim, some attention, but no sales. Okay? I was outsold by Dark Knight and Watchmen at least 10 to 50, 10 as 50 to 1. Okay? And the reason for that, and the lesson I learned from that, was that the audience for comic books really has no interest in nuance, in anything that challenges its own opinions. It wants to have its opinions challenged. Dark Knight is a book that, when you break it down, is a pandering and patronizing satisfaction to an audience that has wanted someone to tell them that it's okay to still read the same shit they read when they were 12. Because Batman is basically about a 15-year-old boy's idea of what a rich guy would do if he had a bad day when he was 8. is a guy who dresses up like a bondage freak and beats the living shit out of people he doesn't know at night. Bruce Wayne was the latest man dead, so finally someone knew what to do with that money. And Watchmen was a cautionary tale that has become a training manual for second-rate talent to do dark and edgy bullshit. Let's face it, most of you thought that Rorschach was the hero of the book. Okay?
He is. No.
I would question that.
And Flag was a book that was not about a guy in a mask or a cape. Shit didn't come out of his eyes. He wasn't walking around with the I mean, Raymond Chandler once described Alan Ladd as a small boy's idea of a tough guy, which I thought was a phenomenal book. And that's sort of how I feel about those books. That these guys, there's so much self-dramatization and self-mythologizing going on, that when I see talent self-mythologizing, like Steranko, like Frank, like Grant Morrison, striking these poses, that, it's not, comics are a frivolous and pointless medium that are difficult to do well, but it doesn't drain you and demand of you anything more than a skill set. But I realized that I was 34 years old with no prospects. I had attention. My life was saved by First Comics because they offered me a paycheck that made it possible for me to get out from under the debt that I had accrued working for that currently dead for Byron Price. I was up to my ass in debt. I know comic book fans don't like to hear about the real world shit because they think that, the Falcon and Winter Soldier was real. When that band turned the Falcon down for a loan, I knew I was in bullshit country. I mean, come on, really? That bank would have given that motherfucker the money free, no interest, just for the opportunity to say on a billboard, we just gave the Falcon $1 million fucking dollars. But no. At any rate, I moved to California because I needed to find a way. I wasn't sure I was going to live this long, but I knew that I might make it to 50. I'm 72, as I said. And I did not want to find myself living on Social Security and cat food casseroles. So I had another career. I found another career. I took my energies, moved west, hoped to get into movies, and ended up in television. I never worked in a television show I watched, but my experience that followed this confirmed my worst fears, which is that I have no commercial footprint in the context of mainstream comic books. I've said more than once that I am too weird for the mainstream and too mainstream for the weird. The weird guys, the art college assholes, the art Spiegel and shit stains, regard me as, I'm just a Marvel superhero artist, right? Whereas the mainstream comic book guys say, what the fuck is he doing? And more recently, the left wing, the self-identified identitarians, the guys who use the word problematic when they mean blasphemous, and they use the word controversial when they mean profane, because it's become a secular religion, identify me now as a right-wing nutcase. No. Whereas the right wing, hearing that identification, presumes that I'm a ready ally to them. But I was in Austin, Texas last weekend. Last time I was in Austin, I got a full court press from the Comics Gate guys to come over and work with me. What in God's name could ever possess you to think that I would deal with you fucking mouth-breathing, knuckle-dragging, bottom-feeding shit stains? For fuck's sake. On the other hand, the other schmucks, who literally see the world through the scrim of the deeply limited armature that is the comic book. The comic book paradigm is basically a transliteration of the Chuck Jones Roadrunner Coyote cartoons. Batman chases the Joker. There's an illusion of closure, but the closure isn't real. That Superman dies, but he's not really dead because nobody really dies in comics. These corporate entities, they're required. One of the reasons I do short work is so that I can do stories with closure, with characters who evolve, characters who change. In the context of comics, character development is defined by putting a circle or taking it off Batman's symbol, putting Spider-Man in the black outfit as opposed to red and blue. And you guys eat it up with a spoon. You guys buy into this shit daily. You're easily flummoxed. You are a participant in your own crime. You are in a Stockholm system relationship with a bunch of bullshit. So, but I also acknowledge the fact that I love doing comic books. I truly do. I love comics. I don't read them anymore because there's no one writing comics. The last comic book I read that gave me any pleasure was Palomino by Stephen King. I love Tony Fleek's book, Stray Dogs, you know. But, you know, I don't really need to see, I mean, when I consider what is demanded of the ambitious in comic books, it makes my heart explode because there's no risk. There's no really, the ambition is achieved by writing the X-Men. So, when I lost my last television job, I was financially set. You know, I have a pension, I live on my pension. You know, I made a great deal of money working on shows I would never watch. But my CV, my resume indicated I must love superhero comic books because I'm working in the comic book business. Remember, the marketplace for Marvel, you know, with the Super Dragon, monster space, mutant, monster bullshit that is the pervasive culture in pop culture today, presumes that we are victims of our own obsessions and our own loves. Gil Kane stopped reading fiction when he came under the sway of Arthur Clarendon and Burt Bogart, to I think his detriment. He never learned to write comics. I still read everything. I read fiction, I read nonfiction. I steal from the best. And I love genre material. The genre, I have no interest in science fiction, no interest in horror, no interest in mutants, and I'm not really much for space. And, you know, and shit coming out of their eyes, that's for children. You know, so I like westerns, historicals, crime, filth, stuff that interests me. And I came to understand and accept the fact that I was overestimating the audience and mistakenly assuming that there was an audience that reflected my sensibilities as well as those of, justifying one's work by basically slathering gravitas and making it edgy. I was asked to write the introduction to the Batman penis book. And I declined. I said, I'm not going to encourage this shit. You know, it's nonsense. It's ridiculous. You know, my pitch, I'm all over the place, so that's why I'm having a good time. My pitch, in the early 80s, they asked all of us to pitch Superman. My pitch for Superman got me laughed out of the room, but it's become legendary. No, you want to hear my pitch? Yeah. It's morning in Metropolis. There are 2 or 3 pages of those grids, 12 panel pages, alarm clocks going off, people waking up, getting up, going to work. Among them we see Clark Kent. And we see the streets of Metropolis, busy. It's not New York, it's Chicago. Because that's the big city that Siegel and Schuster knew. The big city. Everybody's moving around. And all of a sudden, there's a sonic boom, and everybody looks up. And all of a sudden, the air is filled with Frank Lesser's song, "You've got the cool, clear eyes of a seeker of wisdom and truth. You've got that upturned chin, reminiscent of gin and vermouth," unfortunately off key. And then there's a double page spread of Superman, soaring across the skies of Metropolis, wearing a Walkman, singing along with the original soundtrack of How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. He swoops to the Daily Planet building, lands in a window, gets in the storage room, and becomes Clark Kent. And we see Clark dealing with this day. And we come to understand that everybody in Metropolis knows that Clark Kent is Superman. But they don't want to hurt his feelings. I would read that fucking. And weirdly, I had not read the screenplay for The Truman Show yet. The screenplay for The Truman Show is very different from the movie. It's an Andrew Nichols screenplay. It's unproducible. In the screenplay, Truman is kept drunk all day, all night. He's completely doped. So he never notices the fact that New York City lives in his diorama. Needless to say, this is not flying. And I knew it wasn't going to, but I'm a pixie. I'm kind of mischievous. And I was 32 or 33 at the time. And cute. I was good looking. You know, I looked like the clone version of Raul Julia and Robert Downey Jr. Now I look like Ed Asner doing an unmade bed show. And I knew that, and I said, what'll happen now is that Frank did his pitch, John Allen Moore did his pitch, and I said, you're wasting all of our time because John Bird's going to do this book because he really wants to do this book. And that was that. But, you know, I recognized that I was never going to have a serious commercial following. You know, I spent most of the books I've signed this weekend in Star Wars comic books. And, you know, I regret doing that book enormously. Because I didn't do a good job. Had I known it was going to, at first, be as big a deal as it was, and then become a secular religion in the 21st century, I'd like to think I would have done a better job. I'm not sure I had the skill set to do so. I also deeply resent and regret the fact that the company was going bankrupt, and those books saved the company's lives, and I have never earned additional monies on those pages, anything more than a flat fee of $15 a page. So had the royalty system been in place at that point, I would have maybe been $1 million and $2 million for the book that I did on Star Wars. But I would probably be dead, because I knew how to live. Excuse me a moment. I wasn't much for disco, but I liked ladies of disco. And I like drugs a great deal. I don't anymore. I've moved beyond that. So basically, I had to come to California to find a way to make a